Back in 2019, Telus revealed their plans to invest $40 billion into rural expansion of their network within Canada between the years of 2020 and 2022. This move would see the telecommunication giant provide broadband internet to rural and remote communities, with it being just another investment in Telus' significant ongoing infrastructure development in these areas. Now, this is something that we can't take for granted. In this COVID era and future post-COVID era, the need for Canadians to have an online presence is more urgent than ever. And Telus' expansion to accommodate users in remote areas of Canada is extremely important to our country's economic and technological development. One of the biggest technological innovations in education within the past decade has been the introduction of standalone VR headsets as a learning aid. Previously, in order to use the full features that VR had to offer, a user would need the right PC hardware and the right accessories, which was expensive for the average person. Standalone VR headsets eliminate the need to physically own a dedicated PC or console with which to run virtual reality apps, which has greatly reduced the entry barrier to VR to newcomers. Facebook is in the process of releasing their Oculus Quest, a standalone all-in-one VR headset with companies such as Google, Samsung, and Apple, all aiming to release their very own standalone cost-effective VR headset and apps by 2020 and 2021. Now, the need to implement VR for educational purposes in rural areas has been in the works since 2007. Research states that children benefit from new experiences, which expand their mental map of the world. But the need is especially acute for children in low-income rural dwelling families. So why is VR even more important in rural education than anywhere else? Well, VR allows students to gain close to real-world experiences as possible from the comfort of their own homes or from their own classrooms. Children from affluent homes or families within the city have access to better resources, such as field trips abroad, through which they learn more about the world and their place in it. Children living in remote towns across the country are less likely to have these options available to them. Now, this is where virtual reality comes in. VR makes it possible to bridge the gap between educational inequality by providing richer and more interactive experiences than traditional learning from outdated textbooks. With the flick of a button, students can transport themselves to rich 3D environments, such as visiting a 1-to-1 scale replica of the Great Pyramids of Giza, the International Space Station, or even the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The potential to develop the curious nature within children multiplies tenfold with VR, and long-term leads to a more educated rural population, which can greatly reduce the educational disparity between rural and urban school settings, and lead to a more well-rounded and highly skilled working population across the country. Already across the world, we are seeing more and more countries and governments take initiatives to implement VR into school curriculums and public libraries, with developing countries such as Myanmar, rural US states such as Mississippi, towns in the UK, and more importantly to Canadians, schools in Canada taking steps in the right direction. With this rise of technology and the reduction of cost of entry with this tech, the demand for VR to be implemented in educational settings is slowly growing around the world. While the Canadian government is looking for ways to introduce online learning to more rural schools and libraries within the country, VR is something that will be more difficult to implement. Immersive experiences with 360-degree video applications requires a lot of data. A low-res 360 experience, which is available with most VR head-mounted displays, requires at least 25 megabits a second for streaming. For resolutions comparable to HDTV, the requirement jumps to 80 to 100 megabits per second. While the big cities have the luxury of providing customers with higher bandwidth, that unfortunately isn't the case for many rural regions within Canada. In fact, in April of 2020, new data released by the Canadian Internet Registration Authority showed that the median rural download speeds were measured at 3.78 megabits per second, compared to 44.1 megabits per second in urban Canada, a difference of nearly 12 times. This completely rules out VR being consistently used in a rural educational setting for the time being. However, the good news is that we are still in the early days of VR. This technology still being in development gives Telus the advantage of being the first to develop high-speed internet infrastructure in educational settings such as schools, universities, and libraries in rural and remote communities. Telus also has the advantage of having huge amounts of prior investments in these areas. This puts them in a pole position to accommodate this future need for high-speed internet for Canadians, as the advent of VR, as well as the demand for other high bandwidth requiring services such as video streaming and cloud gaming, will be growing rapidly in remote and rural communities within the near future. While this is a long-term endeavor, it is something that is drastically needed in this day and age, where remote learning and work from home situations are more common than ever. Trying to solve the problem of educational inequality is something all countries are striving to work towards, and Telus can become a top contributor in Canada's goal to reduce this gap. By further investing in their rural expansion project while focusing more towards educational settings, Telus has the opportunity to really cement its position in industry as the most progressive and most reliable telecommunications network around the globe.